I always thought our marriage was unshakable. Emily and I built a life together, grounded in love, trust, and shared dreams. We had 3 beautiful children, Mia, Ethan, and Grace. And despite the challenges of my career in the military, I believed we had something rare and unbreakable. The first crack appeared during my most recent deployment. Emily's calls and texts, once a steady stream of comfort, began to dwindle. When we did talk, her words felt distant, like she was holding something back. I chalked it up to the stress of managing 3 kids while I was away. She's tired, I told myself, trying to push away the gnawing unease in my gut. When my commander approved an unexpected 2-week leave, I was thrilled to surprise Emily and the kids. I imagined the joy on Mia's face, the way Ethan would jump into my arms, and Grace's squeal of excitement. I also craved the warmth of Emily's embrace, the feeling of home that I'd been missing for months. But when I walked through the front door, something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet for a home with 3 young kids. I called out, "I'm home," expecting a flurry of little feet racing to greet me. Nothing. My voice echoed back at me in the stillness. I dropped my duffel bag and began walking through the house. The kids weren't in the living room or the backyard. My heart started to race. As I climbed the stairs, I heard a muffled laugh, a man's laugh. It was coming from our bedroom. I froze, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was hearing. I didn't want to believe it, but my body moved on autopilot. I pushed the door open and found them, Emily and a man I didn't recognize. They were tangled in the sheets, her laughter dying the moment she saw me. For a second, no one moved. Time seemed to stretch infinitely, the room frozen in a tableau of betrayal. Emily's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. The man scrambled to grab his clothes, muttering apologies that meant nothing. I didn't yell. I didn't lunge at him, though every fiber of my being screamed for me to do so. Instead, I just stood there, staring at the woman I had loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, the person I had trusted with every piece of my heart. "Get out," I finally said, my voice low and cold. The man bolted past me, and the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Emily sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest. "Daniel, she began, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare try to explain." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. Not this time. The weight of what I had seen, of what she had done, pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. I felt shattered, hollow, and angry all at once. I left the room without another word, ignoring her sobs as I made my way downstairs. I needed air. I needed to think. Most of all, I needed to figure out how the hell to tell Mia, Ethan, and Grace that their world was about to change forever. That night, as I sat in my car outside the house, I stared at the wedding ring on my finger. It felt heavier than it ever had before. I had always thought that love could survive anything. But now, I wasn't so sure that I spent the night in my car, parked down the street. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Emily with him replayed in my mind. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the audacity. In our bed. In our home. It felt like she had tainted everything we had built together. Morning came, and with it, a new wave of anger. But there was also a quiet, simmering clarity. I had to face this. For my kids, if not for myself. I needed answers, even though I knew they wouldn't fix anything. When I walked back into the house, the kids were awake, their laughter drifting down from the kitchen. Emily was there too, making pancakes like it was just another Sunday morning. She glanced at me, her face pale and lined with worry. But she didn't say anything, not in front of the kids. "Daddy!" Mia shouted, running toward me with Ethan and Grace hot on her heels. They clung to me, their tiny arms wrapping around my legs. I crouched down and hugged them tightly, savoring their innocence. They had no idea their mother had just detonated our family. After breakfast, Emily followed me into the backyard while the kids played in the living room. She stood a few feet away, her arms crossed defensively. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "Save it," I said flatly. "I just want to know how long." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of lies, stolen moments, and sneaking around while I was serving my country. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Who is he? I asked, my tone cold and detached. His name is Michael. He's just someone I met at the gym. At the gym. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. The gym. While I was halfway across the world, risking my life, you were working out. Great. Daniel, it wasn't like that, she pleaded. I was lonely. You're gone so much and Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to justify this. I've sacrificed everything for this family, for you. And this is how you repay me? She fell silent, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after what she'd done. I'm staying for the kids, I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. They deserve stability, and I'll be damned if I let your mistake ruin their lives. But you and me? We're done. Her breath hitched, but she didn't argue. She knew better. The days that followed were hell. I threw myself into parenting, spending as much time with the kids as I could. Emily and I existed like ghosts in the same house, communicating only when necessary and avoiding each other at all costs. Every time I saw her, a fresh wave of anger and pain surged through me. But the kids, Mia, Ethan, and Grace, they were my anchor. Their laughter, their hugs, their unshakable belief that their dad was a hero gave me the strength to keep going. For them, I would endure anything. I didn't know what the future held, whether we'd sell the house, separate completely, or try to co-parent under the same roof. But one thing was certain. The man I was before that night was gone. Betrayal had a way of changing you, of hardening your heart. And while I didn't know who I'd become, I knew I would survive, for my kids, if for nothing else. The weeks that followed were a blur. I felt like I was living two lives. The father who smiled for his kids and helped with homework, and the broken man grappling with betrayal in the quiet hours of the night. Emily tried to talk to me a few times, but I shut her down every time. There was nothing left to say. I started sleeping on the couch. At first, the kids didn't notice. But one night, Mia came down the stairs, rubbing her eyes and clutching her stuffed bunny. "Daddy, why are you sleeping down here?" she asked, her voice small and confused. I froze, caught off guard. I snored too much, I said, forcing a smile. Mommy needs her beauty sleep. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and climbed into my lap. "You're still the best daddy ever," she whispered before falling asleep in my arms. Her words hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting to protect their childhood. But protecting them didn't mean ignoring reality. Emily's affair had cracked the foundation of our family, and there was no hiding that forever. I had to figure out what came next. One Saturday morning, I decided to take the kids out for the day. Emily stayed home, saying she had errands to run, but I didn't care. I needed space. We spent the day at the park, eating ice cream and chasing each other around. For a few hours, I felt almost normal, like the old me was still somewhere in there. As we were leaving, I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the playground, his face vaguely familiar. It took me a moment to place him, but when I did, my blood ran cold. Michael, the man who had been with my wife. He didn't see me, or maybe he didn't recognize me, but the sight of him, so casually sitting there, infuriated me. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to make him feel the pain he'd caused. But then Ethan tugged on my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Dad, can we go get pizza?" he asked, his eyes full of excitement. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, buddy. Let's go." As I drove away, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, my kids laughing in the back seat. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. So I made a decision. I would deal with Michael, but not in front of them. That night, after the kids were in bed, I told Emily what I'd seen. "I ran into your friend today," I said, my voice cold. Her face went pale. "Michael?" I nodded. "At the park, near the playground." She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said enough. "Do you know what I wanted to do?" I continued. "I wanted to walk over there and knock him out, but I didn't. Because our kids were there. Because I have to be the adult in this situation. Daniel, I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. Stop, I interrupted. You don't get to say that. You did hurt me. You hurt all of us. And now, you need to figure out how to live with that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. The next few months were a slow, painful process. Emily and I started seeing a counselor, not to save our marriage, but to learn how to co-parent effectively. I told her I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for the sake of the kids, we needed to find a way to coexist. Through it all, I focused on being the best father I could be. I took Mia to her dance recitals, helped Ethan build his science fair project, and read Grace bedtime stories every night. They were my reason to keep going, my reminder that life could still be good, even in the midst of heartbreak. As for Emily, she tried to make amends in her own way. She was more present with the kids, more attentive to their needs. But between us, the silence was deafening. We spoke only when necessary, and even then, our words were clipped and strained. One evening, as I was tucking Grace into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy happy?" she asked. I hesitated, my throat tightening. "We're trying, sweetheart," I said finally, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're trying." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the best I could offer. Months turned into a year, and though life settled into some semblance of normalcy, the wounds Emily had inflicted remained raw. We continued to co-parent, but our interactions were strictly functional. The house felt more like a shared space than a home. The kids seemed to sense the shift, though they never voiced it outright. Mia, now 9, had become more reserved. Ethan, at 7, seemed to cling to me more than ever, always asking for reassurance. Grace, at only 4, didn't fully understand, but even she would occasionally ask questions I struggled to answer. One evening, as I sat in the garage repairing Ethan's bike, Emily came out and stood in the doorway. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I glanced up, already feeling the tension rise. "What is it?" She stepped closer, her hands wringing nervously. I need to know if there's ever going to be a chance for us. For our family." Her words hit me like a gut punch. I set the wrench down and looked at her, trying to find the right words. "Emily, I don't know," I said finally, my voice steady but firm. "What you did, it broke something. I don't know if it can be fixed." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand. I wanted you to know I'll keep trying. For the kids. For us." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I appreciated her effort? That I wished things could go back to how they were? None of it felt true. After she left, I sat there alone, staring at the bike. I wanted to move on, to rebuild, but I didn't know how. My trust in her, in the life we had built, had been obliterated. One day, a moment of clarity came when I was out with Ethan. We had gone fishing, a rare father-son outing where it was just the two of us. As we sat on the dock, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan turned to me. "Dad, are you sad because of Mom?" he asked, his young voice cutting through the stillness. I froze, caught off guard. "Why do you ask that?" I said carefully. He shrugged. "I hear you too sometimes. You don't laugh together anymore. And you sleep on the couch." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's complicated, buddy. Grown-up stuff." Ethan frowned. "But you're still here, right? You won't leave us?" His words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Never," I said firmly. "I will always be here for you, Mia and Grace. No matter what." He nodded, seeming satisfied, and cast his line back into the water. But his question lingered in my mind long after we got home. In the months that followed, I made a decision. My priority had to be my kids. Whatever anger and bitterness I felt toward Emily couldn't overshadow my role as their father. They needed stability, love, and a sense of normalcy, even if their parents couldn't give it to them as a couple. I focused on being present for them, attending every school event, coaching Ethan's soccer team, and making Sunday pancake breakfasts a tradition. Slowly, the kids began to blossom again. Mia's laughter returned, Ethan's confidence grew, and Grace's innocent joy lit up the house. As for Emily and me, we remained civil, though distant. She respected my boundaries and continued to try to rebuild trust in small ways, being more open about her schedule, prioritizing family time, and even suggesting therapy. I agreed to try counseling, not because I believed it would save our marriage, but because I needed clarity. Through therapy, I learned to process my anger and grief, and for the first time, I began to see Emily not just as the woman who betrayed me, but as a flawed human being who had made a terrible mistake. It didn't erase the pain, but it allowed me to let go of some of the resentment. One night, after the kids were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in months, we had an honest conversation. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Emily said, her voice trembling, "but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. For everything." I looked at her, searching for the woman I had once loved. She was still there, buried beneath the mistakes and the pain. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly, "but I can't let this hatred define me. For the kids' sake and for mine, I need to move forward." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded. "Thank you." Moving forward didn't mean reconciliation. It meant creating a new normal. We agreed to separate but continued living under the same roof for the time being, ensuring the kids felt supported. Over time, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I thought I had lost. I found joy in the little moments, Ethan's wide grin when he scored his first goal, Mia's excitement over her art projects, Grace's endless hugs. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was ours. And for the first time since that devastating night, I began to feel like I could breathe again. The day I moved out was one of the hardest of my life. Emily and I had sat down with the kids a week prior to explain what was happening. We framed it in a way they could understand. That mom and dad would live in different houses, but we'd still be a family, and they'd always come first. Grace, being only 4, didn't fully grasp it. She asked if I was going away for work again, and her innocent question nearly broke me. Ethan's face had been serious, but he nodded solemnly, as if he was trying to be the man of the house in my absence. Mia didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the floor, her jaw tight. Later that night, she crawled into my lap and cried until she fell asleep. When moving day arrived, I packed my things while the kids were at school. Emily stayed out of my way, though I caught her watching me from the kitchen doorway once or twice. There was sadness in her eyes, but I didn't have the energy to address it. This was hard enough without rehashing old wounds. As I loaded the last of my boxes into the truck, Emily stepped outside. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft. I turned, bracing myself. "Yeah." She hesitated, her arms crossed over her chest. "Thank you. For everything you've done for the kids. For trying." I nodded, the words catching in my throat. "They deserve it." And with that, I drove away. My new apartment was small but cozy. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and another for the kids when they stayed over. I decorated their room with their favorite colors, pink for Grace, blue for Ethan, and a hint of purple for Mia. I wanted it to feel like a home, even if it wasn't the one they were used to. The first weekend they stayed with me was bittersweet. They ran through the apartment, excited about their new space. But every so often, I'd catch them glancing around, as if trying to reconcile this new normal. That night, as I tucked them in, Mia asked, "Do you miss us when we're at Mom's?" "Every second," I said, kissing her forehead. Ethan chimed in from the top bunk. "We'll miss you too, Dad. But we'll come back soon, right?" "Always," I promised. Over time, our lives began to take shape in this new arrangement. Emily and I communicated only about the kids, but we managed to maintain a respectful co-parenting relationship. There were moments when bitterness tried to creep in, like when I saw Michael's car parked in the driveway one day, but I forced myself to focus on what mattered. My children. I threw myself into being the best dad I could be. I coached Ethan's soccer team, attended Mia's school play, and helped Grace learn to ride her bike. Every laugh, every hug, every small victory reminded me why I kept going. But there were also moments of loneliness. Nights when the apartment felt too quiet, when the ache of what I'd lost crept in. I started going to the gym more, running until my legs burned, hoping to outrun the memories. I made an effort to reconnect with old friends, leaning on them in ways I never had before. One evening, my buddy Luke invited me to a barbecue. "You need to get out," he insisted. "Meet some people. You've been cooped up too long." I reluctantly agreed. The barbecue was full of strangers, and I felt out of place at first, but as the night wore on, I found myself relaxing. There was laughter, good food, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Toward the end of the evening, I found myself chatting with a woman named Hannah. She was warm, with a quick wit and a smile that felt genuine. We talked about everything: our kids, work, life's curveballs. When I mentioned my military career, she asked thoughtful questions, not the usual surface-level stuff. By the time I left, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: possibility. I didn't rush into anything with Hannah. My focus was still on my kids and rebuilding my life, but we stayed in touch, exchanging texts and meeting for coffee now and then. Slowly, cautiously, we got to know each other. When I introduced her to Mia, Ethan, and Grace months later, I was nervous. But she was patient, letting the kids warm up to her in their own time. Ethan bonded with her over video games. Mia appreciated her interest in art, and Grace loved the way she always remembered to bring her favorite snacks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I started to believe that happiness was possible again. Not the life I'd planned, but something new, something real. Looking back, I wouldn't say I was thankful for what happened. The betrayal, the pain. It changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. But it also taught me how strong I was, how much I could endure for the sake of my kids. And in the end, it showed me that even in the darkest moments, there's a chance to rebuild. I wasn't the same man I was before, but I was okay with that. I had my kids, a second chance at happiness, and a future that I was ready to embrace. As time went on, life began to feel less like a struggle and more like something worth living again. The kids adjusted well to the new arrangement, splitting their time between Emily's house and mine. It wasn't easy, but it worked. I made a point to show up for every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, and every dance recital. The laughter in my apartment started to feel more natural. The memories we made there just as meaningful as the ones from the house we used to share. Hannah became a bigger part of my life, not by pushing her way in, but by simply being there. She respected my boundaries, my caution, and most importantly, my devotion to my kids. Over time, her presence became a quiet comfort, something I didn't even realize I needed until it was there. One evening, we were sitting on the couch after the kids had gone to bed at my place. She was flipping through a photo album Mia had left out, smiling at pictures from when the kids were little. "They're amazing," she said, tracing her finger over a picture of Ethan as a toddler, grinning with a mouthful of cake. "They are," I said, leaning back against the cushions. "They're the best thing I've ever done." Hannah looked at me, her expression soft but serious. "You're doing an incredible job, Daniel. They're lucky to have you." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was just surviving, just getting through each day. But in that moment, I realized she saw me, not as broken, not as a man defined by his past, but as someone who was trying, someone who was rebuilding. I leaned in and kissed her, not out of desperation or sadness, but out of something that felt a lot like hope. Over time, Hannah became more integrated into our lives. She never tried to replace Emily. She knew that wasn't her role. Instead, she became someone the kids could count on in a different way. Grace adored her stories before bedtime. Ethan loved her competitive spirit when they played board games. And Mia found in her someone who listened without judgment. Emily noticed the shift, too. At first, she seemed wary, but over time, her attitude softened. One evening, when she dropped the kids off, she lingered for a moment. "Hannah seems nice," she said, her tone surprisingly genuine. "She is," I replied, watching as the kids ran into the house. Emily hesitated. "I'm glad you're finding your way, Daniel. You deserve that." It wasn't exactly closure, but it felt like a step toward peace. The real turning point came one sunny afternoon when we all gathered for Ethan's soccer championship. Emily and I sat on opposite sides of the bleachers at first, but when Mia waved for us to sit together, we obliged. Ethan scored the winning goal in the last 5 minutes of the game, and everyone erupted in cheers. Without thinking, Emily and I hugged, caught up in the moment. For the first time, it didn't feel awkward. It felt like two parents sharing pride in their child. Nothing more, nothing less. Hannah joined us after the game, congratulating Ethan and chatting with Emily briefly. Watching them interact, I felt a sense of balance I hadn't thought possible a year ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Life isn't a clean slate. It's a canvas with smudges and scars, layers of mistakes and growth. My story with Emily didn't have a fairy tale ending, but it didn't have to. We found a way to coexist, to put the kids first, and to move forward separately but respectfully. With Hannah, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: trust, connection, and the courage to build a new future. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was real, and it was mine. And as I watched my kids grow, thrive, and laugh despite everything, I knew that, in the end, we were going to be okay. The months rolled on, and life kept settling into its new rhythm. My relationship with Hannah deepened, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living again, not just going through the motions. The kids adored her, and even Emily seemed to appreciate her presence, as if Hannah's calm demeanor eased some of the lingering tension between us. Still, something gnawed at me, especially in the quiet moments. It wasn't resentment toward Emily anymore. Counseling and time had dulled that pain. It wasn't even guilt over moving on with Hannah. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a sense that no matter how good things seemed on the surface, there was a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. One Friday evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing a proposal for a consulting gig a friend had roped me into, I got a text from Emily. Emily, can we talk? Me, about the kids? Emily, no, about us. I stared at the screen, my gut tightening. What could she possibly want to talk about? We'd done our therapy sessions, reached a truce, and established a system for the kids. We'd even managed to be civil at family events. Why dredge up the past now? I typed back, not tonight. Busy. We'll talk next week. Her reply came almost instantly. It's important. Please. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Against my better judgment, I called her. What's so urgent, Emily? She hesitated. I could hear it in her breathing. I think there's something you need to know. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tightening. Go on. I know it's been a long time since everything, and I know we've both moved on in our own ways, but, she paused, and my patience frayed. Emily, just spit it out. Her voice cracked. Michael's not who you think he is. I froze. The anger that had simmered down for months bubbled up again. You want to talk to me about him? My voice was low, sharp. Why the hell would I care? He's out of the picture, isn't he? Yes, she said quickly, but that's not what I mean. I'm not talking about the affair. Then what? I demanded. There was a long silence on her end, and when she finally spoke, her words sent a chill through me. I don't think the affair was the worst thing he did. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice cold and tight. I think he's dangerous, Daniel, she said, her voice trembling. And I think I've put you and the kids in danger. The conversation was a blur after that. Emily tried to explain, but her words were fragmented, like she was piecing together a puzzle without knowing what it would look like in the end. Michael, it turned out, had a history, not just of infidelity, but of manipulation, deception, and worse. Emily claimed she'd recently discovered things: money missing from her accounts during the time they'd been involved, lies he'd told about his past, and disturbing hints that his interest in her wasn't purely romantic. I ended it because I knew it was wrong, she said. But now I think he didn't take it well. What are you saying? I asked, my hand gripping the edge of the table. I think he's been watching us. Watching me, the kids, maybe even you. I've seen his car a few times, parked near the house, but when I look, he's gone. My blood ran cold. And you're telling me this now? After months? I didn't want to believe it, she admitted. I thought I was imagining things. But it's happening, Daniel. I know it is. I hung up shortly after, too furious and unsettled to keep talking. Was this just Emily's guilt warping her perception? Or was there something real to her fear? I spent the rest of the night pacing the apartment, going over every moment from the past few months, trying to piece together if I'd noticed anything off. And then it hit me. The park. The man I'd seen that day, sitting on the bench near the playground. I'd brushed it off as coincidence, but now, with Emily's words ringing in my ears, I wasn't so sure. And worse than that, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weight of Emily's revelation didn't leave me. Every instinct I'd honed in the military, every bit of training that taught me how to spot danger, screamed that something wasn't right. I couldn't let this sit. Not with the kids involved. Not with Hannah now part of the picture too. The following day, I called Emily back. "Have you seen him again?" I asked without preamble. "No," she said hesitantly. "But, Daniel, I know what I saw." "Fine," I said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll take the kids this weekend. Keep an eye out, stay vigilant, and let me know if anything happens." "Daniel," she began, but I cut her off. "I'll handle it, Emily." That weekend, I picked up the kids as usual, trying to act as normal as possible. But every time we left the house, whether to grab ice cream or head to the park, I found myself scanning the streets, watching for anything or anyone out of place. Saturday night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch with Hannah, debating whether to tell her. She was perceptive and had already picked up on my tension. "Something's bothering you," she said, folding her legs beneath her. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Emily said some things," I admitted. "About Michael. She thinks he might be lurking around." Hannah's face darkened. "Around you? The kids?" "She's not sure," I said. "And I don't want to alarm you, but if there's any truth to it." "What can we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the concern in her eyes. "Just stay alert," I said. "If you notice anything unusual, tell me. And if I'm not here and something happens, call the police." She nodded, and though we didn't talk about it again that night, I could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the present and the future. Sunday afternoon, the kids and I were in the backyard tossing a frisbee around when I spotted something. A flash of light reflecting off metal, coming from a car parked farther down the street. My heart rate spiked as I recognized the make and model. It was the same one I'd seen at the park months ago. "Hey, guys," I called, forcing my voice to stay light. "Let's head inside. I'll grab some popsicles." Mia gave me a curious look. "But we're not done playing." "Inside," I said, my tone firmer this time. She nodded, and they all trooped back into the house. I locked the door behind them and pulled out my phone. I debated calling the police right then and there, but decided to see for myself first. I grabbed my keys and told Hannah I'd be right back, making an excuse about running to the store. As I walked toward the car, my heart hammered in my chest. It was parked half a block away, partially obscured by a line of trees. The closer I got, the more I noticed. The way the engine was idling, the faint glow of a cigarette inside. I reached the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. The man inside flinched, his eyes snapping to mine. It was him. "Michael, what the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice low and sharp. He rolled down the window, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Hey, Daniel," he said, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Nice to see you." My fists clenched. "You've got 5 seconds to explain why you're parked outside my house." He shrugged casually, as if we were old friends catching up. "Just wanted to see how Emily's doing. How you're doing. Heard you've moved on. That's good for you." "Don't play games with me," I growled. "Stay the hell away from my family." Michael's smirk widened, but his eyes were cold. "Relax, man. I'm just here to say hi." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "If I see you near my kids, if I catch you lurking around again, I won't call the cops. I'll deal with you myself. Do you understand me?" For a moment, he just stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Something darker, more dangerous. Then he laughed softly. "You've got some nerve, Daniel. But hey," message received. He flicked his cigarette onto the pavement, started the car, and drove off without another word. I stood there, watching his taillights disappear, my hands trembling with suppressed rage. Something about the encounter left a knot in my stomach, a feeling that this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the encounter in my mind. Michael's words, his tone, the way he'd looked at me. It all felt like a warning, a promise that he wasn't done. And then it hit me. Michael wasn't just trying to intimidate me. He was baiting me. But why? The realization hit me like a freight train. Michael wasn't just trying to intimidate me. He wanted me to react, to lose control. But why? What could he possibly gain from provoking me now, after all these months? The answer was somewhere in the details, in the timing. I couldn't afford to brush it off as random. I needed to get ahead of whatever this was before it spiraled further. The next day, I made a decision. I reached out to a friend from my military days, Sam. He'd retired from active duty and now worked in private security. If anyone could help me figure out what Michael was up to, it was him. "Long time, man," Sam said when he picked up my call. "What's going on?" I gave him a quick rundown, leaving out the messier details about Emily and the affair. "Something about this guy doesn't sit right with me," I finished. "I need to know who he is and what he's capable of." Sam didn't hesitate. "Send me whatever you've got, name, description, license plate if you have it. I'll see what I can dig up." I hung up, feeling a flicker of relief. At least now I had someone on my side, someone who could help me make sense of this tangled web. By midweek, Sam called back. His tone was different. He wasn't his usual laid-back self. "Daniel," he said, "this guy isn't just some random dirtbag. Michael's got a record." "What kind of record?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Fraud, stalking, assault. Nothing that's landed him in prison, but enough to raise some red flags. And here's the kicker. He's used different aliases in the past, which means he's good at covering his tracks." My blood ran cold. "So he's dangerous." "Potentially," Sam said. "And he's calculated. Whatever he's doing, it's not impulsive." That was the confirmation I needed and feared. That night, I sat Emily down to tell her what Sam had found. Her face paled as I recounted the details. "I didn't know it was that bad," she whispered. "I mean, I knew he wasn't normal, but this? This is why you need to be careful," I said firmly. "No more ignoring it. If you see him, you call me or the police immediately." She nodded, her eyes filled with guilt and fear. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for all of this." I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, but part of me still blamed her. She had brought Michael into our lives, into our family. But now wasn't the time to rehash old wounds. "We'll deal with it," I said, standing to leave. "But no more secrets, Emily. Not from me. Not from the kids." The next few days were tense, but uneventful. I kept a close eye on my surroundings, watching for anything unusual. Every shadow felt like a threat, every parked car a potential danger. But Michael didn't reappear. Until he did. It was late Friday night, and I was just getting the kids to bed. As I closed Grace's door, I noticed a faint glow outside the living room window. I crept closer, peering through the curtains, and my stomach dropped. Michael's car was parked across the street, his silhouette visible in the driver's seat. I grabbed my phone, dialing the police as I headed for the front door. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my chance to catch him in the act, to put an end to this once and for all. The line connected. "There's a suspicious vehicle outside my house," I told the operator. "The driver has a history of harassment." My words caught in my throat as Michael's car suddenly revved and peeled away. The operator asked something, but I didn't hear it. My attention was locked on the single piece of paper fluttering on the ground where his car had been. I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the chilly night air. Picking up the paper, I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a photo, grainy but unmistakable. It was of me, standing in the backyard with the kids just a few days ago. Scrawled across the bottom in bold, uneven handwriting was a single word. "Soon." I froze, the picture trembling in my hands. My first instinct was to storm inside, lock every door and window, and stand guard all night. But I knew that wasn't enough. This wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Michael was playing a game, and I had no idea what his next move would be. For the first time since I'd faced him, I felt a sliver of fear creep into my chest. Not for myself, but for my kids, for Hannah, for everything I had left. And for the life of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose it all. The photo stayed in my hand as I stood in the cold, my mind racing. This wasn't a simple act of intimidation. Michael wanted me to feel powerless, to doubt my ability to protect my family. But that wasn't going to happen. Not without a fight. I called Sam immediately, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "I've got a problem," I said, explaining what had happened. "Text me the address," he replied. "I'm on my way." Sam arrived in less than 20 minutes. He stepped out of his truck, his tall frame exuding the quiet confidence I'd always admired. Without a word, I handed him the photo. He studied it for a moment before looking at me. "This guy's escalating," he said. "This isn't just about messing with you. It's about control. He wants you to feel exposed." "Well, it's working," I muttered, glancing back at the house where my kids were sleeping. "We'll handle it," Sam said, his voice firm. "First, let's secure the perimeter. Cameras, motion detectors, the works. If he comes back, we'll know." I nodded. "And then what?" "Then we take the fight to him," Sam said, his tone dark. "But carefully. If we screw this up, he'll disappear, and he might come back when you're not expecting it." Over the next 2 days, Sam helped me fortify the house. We installed cameras at every entry point, floodlights in the backyard, and a motion detector near the driveway. I made sure Emily knew what was happening, too. "I'll keep the kids with me for a while," I told her over the phone, "until we're sure this is handled." She didn't argue. "Do whatever you think is best." Despite the preparations, I couldn't shake the sense that Michael was always one step ahead. Every time the kids laughed or played, I found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was watching. And then, on the 3rd day, the cameras finally caught him. It was late, well past midnight. I'd been sitting in the living room, unable to sleep, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. "Motion detected, front yard." I opened the app and saw him. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the driveway, staring directly into the camera. Even in the grainy footage, I recognized his face. Michael. He was smiling. Adrenaline shot through me as I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. By the time I reached the driveway, he was gone. But this time, he hadn't left a taunting photo or message. Instead, there was a small box sitting on the ground. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart pounding. Carefully, I bent down and picked it up. The box was plain, unmarked, and surprisingly heavy. I carried it inside, locking the door behind me. Sam was already on the phone by the time I set it on the kitchen counter. "Don't open it," he said firmly. "Wait for me. I'll be there in 10. When Sam arrived, he examined the box carefully. He had brought a small toolkit with him and used a knife to carefully pry open the lid. Inside was a stack of photos, each one more chilling than the last. The first was of the kids playing in the backyard. The next showed Emily walking to her car. Another showed Hannah leaving my apartment. But the final photo froze me in my tracks. It was of me, standing in the driveway that night I confronted Michael. In the corner of the photo, a shadowy figure was barely visible, hiding behind a tree. "He's been here longer than we thought," Sam said grimly, setting the photo down. "This isn't just about scaring you, Daniel. He's stalking every part of your life." By the time Sam left, I felt like the walls were closing in. Michael wasn't just a threat. He was a predator, circling everything I cared about. The next day, I made arrangements. The kids would stay with Emily temporarily, and Hannah would stay with her sister until things were resolved. It killed me to send them away, but I couldn't risk their safety. And as for me, I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't going to let Michael keep me living in fear. If he wanted to play games, fine. I was ready to end this. On my terms. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kids were with Emily, and Hannah was safely at her sister's. For the first time in years, I was alone. No laughter, no bedtime stories, just silence and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I sat in the living room, the box of photos still on the table. Each one was burned into my mind. A cruel reminder that Michael wasn't just lurking, he was hunting. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. "Sam, you good?" "Me? As good as I can be." No sign of him tonight. I put the phone down and exhaled, running a hand through my hair. But even as I tried to focus, something felt off. A tension I couldn't place. The air in the room seemed heavier, the shadows longer. And then, I heard it. A faint creak, barely audible, coming from upstairs. My heart stopped. The kids weren't here. No one else was supposed to be in the house. I stood slowly, my instincts kicking in. My military training told me to stay calm, to assess the situation before acting. I reached for the baseball bat I'd stashed by the front door, gripping it tightly as I crept toward the staircase. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. My footsteps were silent on the carpeted stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I reached the top, I froze. The hallway stretched out before me, empty and still. I glanced toward the kids' rooms, doors closed, undisturbed. And then I saw it. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I tightened my grip on the bat and moved closer, every nerve in my body on edge. As I pushed the door open, the room came into view. It was empty. At least, that's what I thought, until I noticed the note on the bed. It was folded neatly, the same uneven handwriting as before scrawled across the front, still watching. I checked every inch of the house, every closet, every corner. But Michael was gone. The note sat on the kitchen table as I paced, trying to make sense of it. How had he gotten inside? I'd locked every door, every window. The cameras hadn't picked up anything. I called Sam, my voice tight with frustration. He was here. What do you mean, here? Sam asked, his tone sharp. In the house, I said. He left another note. I didn't see him, but... You need to get out, Sam interrupted. This guy's not just playing games anymore, Daniel. He's testing you. No, I said firmly. I'm done running. He wants me scared, wants me to feel powerless. I'm not giving him that satisfaction. Sam sighed. Then you'd better be ready, because if he's this bold, he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the baseball bat by my side, waiting, and Michael didn't disappoint. Just past 3 a.m., the motion detector by the backyard pinged. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the feed, and there he was, standing by the tree line, staring directly into the camera. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another figure stepped into view, smaller, hunched. My stomach dropped as I realized who it was. Grace, my daughter. Panic surged through me as I bolted out the back door, yelling her name. But when I reached the yard, there was no one there. No Michael. No Grace. Just the cold night air and an eerie silence. I turned back toward the house, my heart racing, and stopped dead in my tracks. The living room light was on, illuminating the figure standing in the doorway. It was Emily. What the hell are you doing here? I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her face pale and emotionless. Emily, where's Grace? I demanded, stepping closer. And then she smiled, a cold, chilling smile that froze me in place. You should have listened, Daniel, she said, her voice eerily calm. You should have left when you had the chance. Before I could react, the light flickered and went out, plunging the yard into darkness. When I rushed back into the house, Emily was gone. The only thing left was a single photo on the floor, one I hadn't seen before. It was of me, asleep on the couch. Scrawled across the bottom was a new message. It's not Michael you should have feared. And then, the realization hit me. I had been wrong all along. The photo in my hand felt heavier than it should have. My pulse thundered in my ears as the truth started to crystallize. It wasn't Michael. It had never been Michael. All this time, I'd been chasing shadows, convinced that he was the threat. But the real danger had been in front of me the entire time. Emily. The memories started to click into place like pieces of a sinister puzzle. Emily's sudden shift after the affair. Her vague fear of Michael. The way she had played the victim, drawing me into her web. She had been planting seeds of doubt, manipulating me, keeping me distracted while she moved unseen in the background. And Grace, where was Grace? I ran upstairs, throwing open every door, searching for her. Her bed was empty, the covers thrown back as if she had been pulled from it. Grace, I yelled, my voice cracking with panic. The house was empty. The cameras showed nothing. My phone buzzed, and I snatched it up, hoping it was Sam. Instead, it was a blocked number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Emily's voice came through, calm and deliberate. You should have stayed out of it, Daniel. Where is she? I barked. Where's Grace? She ignored the question. You always had to be the hero, didn't you? Always had to control everything, make the decisions. You never once asked yourself if I wanted that life, did you? This isn't about us. I shouted. You're sick, Emily. Just tell me where she is. Don't worry, she said, her voice dripping with malice. She's safe for now. But if you keep playing this game, I can't promise that will stay true. My hands shook as I gripped the phone. What do you want? Emily laughed, low and bitter. I want you to understand, Daniel. This isn't about you anymore. It's about what you took from me. My freedom. My choices. My life. And now, I'm taking yours. The line went dead. My first call was to Sam. Within minutes, he was at my door, his face grim as I filled him in. She's unraveling, he said. Whatever her plan is, she's desperate to see it through. But that's when people like her make mistakes. And Grace? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We'll find her, he promised. But we have to be smart about this. Emily wants you emotional, reactive. Don't give her that. The hours ticked by in agonizing silence as we worked. Sam dug into everything, phone records, financial accounts, anything that might give us a lead. Meanwhile, I scoured every detail of the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. Then, finally, Sam's computer pinged. I've got something, he said, his voice tight. She rented a cabin. Remote location, about 2 hours north. Let's go, I said, grabbing my coat. Hold up, Sam said, blocking my path. If she's armed or unstable, rushing in could make things worse. We call the cops first, get back up. No, I said firmly. We don't have time for that. Grace is up there, and I'm not waiting another second. Sam hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but we do this my way. No heroics. The drive to the cabin was a blur of anxiety and rage. As we pulled up to the secluded property, the woods loomed dark and foreboding. There was no sign of Emily's car, but the faint glow of a lantern shone through the cabin window. Stay behind me, Sam said, his hand on his holstered gun. We approached quietly, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. Sam motioned for me to stay by the door as he peered through the window. After a moment, he nodded. She's alone, he whispered. Let's move. We burst through the door, and Emily didn't even flinch. She was sitting in a chair by the fireplace, her face calm and detached. Where is she? I demanded, stepping forward. Emily smiled faintly. She's fine. For now. Sam leveled his gun at her. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Where's Grace? Emily tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. You think I'm the monster here, don't you? She said, her voice soft. You think you're saving her. But the truth, Daniel, is that you're just like me. You take, you control, and you destroy. Enough. I snapped. Tell me where she is. Emily sighed and stood slowly, raising her hands in mock surrender. She's close, she said. Closer than you think. Before I could process her words, Sam shouted, Look out! Emily lunged, something glinting in her hand. Sam tackled her to the ground, disarming her as I stumbled back. It wasn't until the scuffle ended, with Emily restrained and Sam standing over her, that I saw what she had been holding. It was a lighter. My heart sank as the smell of gasoline hit me. She's not here, Emily said, laughing through clenched teeth. You're too late. And then I saw it. The trapdoor in the corner of the room, the edges darkened with scorch marks. I yanked it open, the heat of flames roaring up to meet me. The basement was ablaze, smoke billowing out in thick clouds. And in the center, barely visible, was Grace, tied to a chair. Grace! I screamed, diving in without hesitation. The next moments were a blur of fire, heat, and adrenaline. Sam's voice shouted something behind me, but I couldn't hear it over the crackling flames. I reached Grace, my hands fumbling with the ropes as the fire closed in. I've got you, I whispered, coughing as smoke filled my lungs. I've got you, baby. With one final pull, the ropes came loose, and I hoisted her into my arms. The heat was unbearable, but I forced myself to move, stumbling back toward the ladder. Sam was there, pulling us up and out into the cool night air. I collapsed on the ground, clutching Grace as she cried into my chest. Emily's laughter echoed behind us as the flames consumed the cabin. She was arrested that night, taken away screaming about how I'd ruined her, how this was all my fault. But none of it mattered. Grace was safe. My kids were safe. And as I held her close, I knew one thing for certain. The storm was over, but its scars would remain forever.